Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
The restaurant hadn't changed in over 2 decades. Same stiff-backed chairs with scuffed legs, same jazz piano looped on low volume in the corner, same red wine stains on the cracked full-leather menus. Hell, even the waiter looked familiar, though the lines on his face had thickened just like mine. I hadn't been back since the night I asked her to marry me 25 years ago. Linda picked the place. Said it was nostalgic, though the word tasted weird coming from her lips, like it belonged to someone with more sentiment and less strategy. She always had a way of dressing her choices in silk, no matter how sharp they cut. She sat across from me in a tight black dress she hadn't worn in years, sipping her wine like it bored her. The lighting made the gold chain around her neck glint every time she turned her head, and she'd been turning it a lot, scanning the room, pretending to look casual, though I'd known her long enough to recognize when her mind was somewhere else. Probably checking if anyone she knew was watching us. That was her thing. Appearances mattered. Especially now, when we were supposed to be some aging power couple still, in love, after a quarter century. I studied the wine swirling in my glass, the rim sticky from her lipstick. My hand hovered over it for a second before I put it down. I'd been off the bottle for a while now. She knew that. Didn't care. Or maybe she forgot. More likely, she didn't bother remembering. So, she said, clinking her glass against mine with a brittle little smile. To 25 years of whatever this has been. That should have been my first clue. Not a word about love. Or loyalty. Or even gratitude. Just whatever this has been. I gave her a small smile in return, nodded like someone who knew the punchline, but let the joke ride anyway. She took a long sip and glanced out the window like she was waiting for a car to crash just to kill the silence. Then, out of nowhere, she let out this sharp, breathy laugh, more like a bark than something joyful. Loud enough that the couple behind her paused mid-bite. She tilted her head back slightly, eyes glinting with that familiar glimmer she used to wear when she wanted to sting without leaving a mark. You know, she said, almost too casually, I really only stayed for the house. The words didn't hit me like a slap, they were more like a cold pour of water down the spine. Not shocking, just bracing, unmistakably real. Like she'd been rehearsing the line in her head and finally found the perfect setting to deliver it. A quarter century of history boiled down to an open floor plan and lakefront view. I didn't say a word. Didn't raise my voice. Didn't let my hands shake, even though I could feel the pulse in my neck throb like a war drum. I reached down beside me and lifted the leather folder I'd placed under the table. It was heavier than it looked, and thicker too, one of those simple black document folders you see lawyers carry when they're about to make someone very uncomfortable. I slid it across the table, slow and steady, like I was handing her a birthday card instead of a carefully constructed grenade. She blinked. The smirk twitched. What's this? Go ahead, I said, my voice calm, almost bored. Open it. She hesitated. Her fingers lingered on the flap like she suddenly had a bad feeling but couldn't quite name it. Then she pulled it open. The first thing she saw was her name, typed in bold on a set of formal documents. Her eyes darted left and right, scanning the pages. Her mouth parted slightly. The color started to drain from her face, not all at once, just slow enough to notice. What the hell is this? Her voice cracked, just a hairline fracture, but enough for someone who'd lived with her long enough to hear it. She glanced up at me, eyes demanding an explanation that I didn't owe her anymore. Read it carefully, I said, leaning back in my chair. I'll have the dessert. I called the waiter over without looking at her again, asked for the apple tart with extra whipped cream, her usual favorite. She didn't even blink. She was still staring at the papers like they might catch fire if she turned away. For a long time, we didn't speak. The jazz kept playing, the plates clinked, and forks scraped around us like we were sitting inside someone else's life. I picked at my dessert while she flipped page after page, her hands shaking just enough to make the edges flutter. I didn't need to explain anything. Not yet. Let her read. Let her sweat. Let her try and remember exactly when she lost control of the narrative. The folder would do the talking for me. There's a kind of silence that settles into a house after 25 years together, the kind that isn't peaceful or warm, but feels more like a stalled engine on a cold morning, humming just enough to fake function while something inside's already broken. That was our kitchen, 6 months ago, right before it all started slipping in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. She was humming while she made tea, some tune from the 90s that used to play on the car radio during road trips, but she didn't even seem to notice she was doing it. It wasn't for me. Linda had been drifting for a while, like a boat cut from the dock, and I'd been standing on the pier pretending the rope was still tied. The receipt was the first crack in the glass. I found it tucked inside a grocery bag she'd left on the passenger seat of her car. Normally, she didn't leave anything lying around. Linda was a woman of compartments, one for work, one for marriage, one for secrets, apparently. The receipt was for a boutique hotel downtown, the kind with champagne on arrival and king beds covered in way too many throw pillows. One night, no dinner, just the room and a bottle of mid-shelf wine. I didn't ask her about it, not right away. Instead, I folded it once, then again, and slid it into the drawer next to the silverware, right beneath the mismatched wine opener and that stupid plastic ring from the time we found it in a cereal box when our son was 10. I sat there for an hour that night, staring at the drawer like it owed me an explanation. That same week, she started mentioning book club again. It had been years since she talked about book club. Last I remembered, her group fell apart when Sandra moved to Florida and Beth got divorced. But suddenly, book club was back, meeting every other Thursday, and sometimes on Tuesdays, and sometimes for last-minute catch-ups at night, always somewhere that didn't make sense and always without any photos or details afterward. She never smelled like coffee or wine when she came home. She smelled like someone who'd taken a second shower at someone else's place and scrubbed away too much of herself in the process. Her phone started buzzing more often, too. Late at night, screen down, ringer off, except for one specific ringtone I didn't recognize. Not loud, just sharp enough to wake me around midnight. I'd open one eye and watch her pick it up, thumb sliding across the screen like a reflex. She'd walk out to the hallway, whisper into it like she was afraid the shadows might snitch. I still didn't say anything. Not then. Some men confront. Others collect. I collect. I asked Jenny, my assistant, to look into a few things. Nothing serious at first. Just hotel names, phone records, car logs. Jenny's been with me for nearly a decade, and she's sharp, the kind of sharp that cuts through noise without drawing attention. She didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer any. She just handed me envelopes every Friday with spreadsheets, dates, sometimes pictures. Each week, the pile got a little taller, like a grave I was digging with data instead of a shovel. Meanwhile, Linda kept smiling like everything was fine. She still asked if I wanted eggs in the morning, still reminded me to water the lawn on Sundays, still posted throwback photos of us online with captions like "My Rock" and "My Forever," but it was all performance. And I guess the saddest part wasn't even the lies, it was how good she was at pretending she cared, like she'd rehearsed it so many times that the mask had more life than the face beneath it. I started seeing the signs in old memories too, like they'd been waiting in the corners all along. That trip to the coast 2 summers ago where she spent more time staring at her phone than the waves. That Christmas when she smiled during the family photo, but cried in the bathroom for 20 minutes after opening a necklace I thought she'd love. That dinner with friends where she laughed at all of David's jokes and didn't even touch her wine because she said she was on something new from her doctor. 6 weekends went by. She said she had conferences, networking events, weekend retreats. That's almost 2 full months of absence if you add up the time. I stopped tracking the hours. I only cared about the pattern. And patterns, when you're patient enough, always lead somewhere. The final straw came with a photo. Jenny handed me an envelope like she was delivering a verdict. Inside, one grainy picture, taken from a distance, through a window at that same boutique hotel. Linda was there, arms around someone. Same tight black dress. Same lipstick. Same smile I hadn't seen in our home in years. The man she was with had his back turned in the photo, but I didn't need to see his face. I knew the build, the haircut, the tan line around the neck from playing golf in short sleeves. I knew because we'd sat across from each other for Sunday dinners and poker nights, and even that goddamn double date on New Year's Eve 2 years back. It was David. David, my so-called friend. David, who once toasted to my lucky life with a grin I now realized had more teeth than warmth. I didn't throw the envelope. I didn't scream. I just sat at my desk while the sun dipped below the edge of the office window, and I let the truth settle into my chest like a brick. You don't just wake up and say something like that, Linda. Not unless you've already said worse behind my back. The paper made a soft, nervous rustling sound as she flipped the first page, like even the weight of her fingers had started to tremble under what she saw. For a moment, she didn't speak, and that alone told me more than her words ever could. Linda, my wife of 25 years, the same woman who once argued over the color of the bathroom tiles for 3 straight days, now sat frozen, lips parted just enough to show her teeth, but no sound came out except her shallow, quickening breaths. The candlelight flickered between us on the table, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had the upper hand, not because I wanted it, but because she'd spent so long assuming I never would. She looked up at me, once, eyes darting in disbelief like a child caught with their hand in the damn cookie jar, except the cookies were bank statements, property deeds, a list of passwords, and photographs taken by a man with a zoom lens and a quiet car. I didn't say a thing. I took another bite of the apple tart and let the cinnamon roll over my tongue while she slowly realized that the show she thought she was directing had just lost its script. The first document was a series of account transfers, all marked with dates that went back 4 months. She blinked at the numbers, probably trying to do the math, to understand when and how and why. Joint checking emptied. Savings relocated. Investment portfolios transferred to a private account under a limited liability trust I'd set up in Wyoming, the kind of place that doesn't ask too many questions if your lawyer knows the right ones to ask. Then she turned the next page, and that's when the panic set in. Her hands moved faster, like maybe if she got through it quick enough, it wouldn't be real. The house deed was next, yes, the house, the one she said she stayed for. Transferred quietly over 3 weeks ago, legally placed under my name alone and into an irrevocable trust for our son. Not even a judge could claw it back without tearing through 4 legal walls and a nightmare of paperwork. ID sat with a trust attorney and laid out the whole thing like I was planning a funeral. In a way, I guess I was. Then came the photos. I saw her eyes lock on the first one like someone had just punched her in the stomach. It was her and David. Of course it was. Same black dress she was wearing tonight. Different night. Different hotel. She had her arms around him, leaning into his chest like a damn teenager. The next photo was grainier, a hallway shot, him adjusting his belt, her checking her lipstick. Neither of them looking guilty. Just comfortable. Familiar. Then came the report. A private investigator's log, days and times, license plates, room numbers, transaction details. Names and dates and a quote from David himself when he thought no one was listening. She says she's just waiting until her son graduates. Then she's out. That was 4 months ago. Our son graduated last spring. Linda whispered something I could barely hear, so I leaned forward. Her voice was cracking like wetwood on a fire. We can fix this. Please, Mark, we can. Talk about this. I almost laughed, but it would have felt like kicking a dog. Not because she didn't deserve it, but because I was already too far past that. I just kept chewing slowly, letting the fork clink against the plate as I took another piece. The tart was sweet, but her panic was sweeter. She reached for my hand, and I let her hover there, inches away, until she dropped it back to her lap like it had burned her. "You didn't have to do all this," she said finally, like that line was supposed to undo months of lies and betrayal. "Neither did you," I said, setting the fork down carefully. "But here we are." I gave her a long look, and it was like seeing a stranger wearing my wife's face. All the memories felt like scenes from a movie I'd once liked but could never rewatch. The way she used to laugh at my dumb impressions of her boss. The way she traced circles on my arm when she couldn't sleep. The way she said forever like she meant it. Maybe she did. But forever, it turns out, has a short shelf life when you're waiting for someone else to make a move. She closed the folder with both hands, holding it like a loaded weapon. Her face had gone pale, but her jaw tightened like she wanted to scream. But not here. No, not where people could see. Linda always needed to control the room. Tonight, she'd lost it. I stood, adjusted my jacket, and left enough cash on the table to cover the bill and then some. She sat there, stunned, gripping the folder like it might vanish if she blinked too hard. I didn't look back as I walked past the bar and out through the heavy double doors into the cool night air. I could still feel the heat of her stare on my back, like a spotlight following a man off stage. Later that night, I blocked her on everything: phone, email, even that stupid couples calendar app we used to share like it meant something. I poured myself a drink for the first time in months and sat on the porch, watching the stars, waiting for the inevitable. I didn't have to wait long. At exactly 11:23, the texts started, one after another. A full stream of denial, desperation, pleading, and just the right amount of veiled threats. I didn't read them. Not yet. But I let them come. Because sometimes silence is louder than screaming. And she needed to hear mine. I woke up at 6:42 the next morning, not to an alarm clock, not to birdsong or the soft rustle of the wind through the trees, but to the cold, mechanical chime of my phone going off again and again. A steady barrage of alerts that buzzed against the nightstand like a dying insect refusing to go quietly. I knew who it was before I rolled over. There wasn't a doubt in my mind, not even a sliver of curiosity. Linda had always been the type who never believed a door was closed unless it slammed so hard the frame cracked. 104 messages. That's not an exaggeration. I counted them. Voice notes, text messages, even a few old-school voicemails for dramatic effect, like maybe hearing her cry in stereo would soften me. Some of them were single words: please, talk, listen. Others were long, rambling monologues that read like diary entries penned at 3 in the morning by a woman trying to rearrange the facts into something that made her look like a victim. She repeated herself often, kept rewriting her version of events like if she found the right order, it would finally become true. The third message in was just 4 words. Please just talk to me. The 7th was a voice recording of her sobbing, breath hitching between words, her voice warbling like someone who hadn't slept. The 15th was angry, accusing me of being cruel, vindictive, heartless. The 21st flipped again, back to regret. She asked if we could meet for coffee. I didn't respond to any of them. I didn't delete them either. There's something satisfying about letting someone scream into the void and knowing you control the echo. By lunchtime, she tried showing up at my office. She must have still had the building pass from the time she brought me lunch last winter, back when we still played pretend for the neighbors and her book club friends. But I had already made a few calls that morning, and the front desk knew not to let her through. Security told me she stood in the lobby for 10 minutes, just standing there, staring at the elevators like maybe she could will them to bring me down. When they asked her to leave, she didn't argue. Just walked out slow and quiet, like someone who'd just figured out the rules of a game she thought she'd been winning. Later that afternoon, I got a text from Karen, David's wife. We'd only spoken once in the past week, and even then, it was brief. She'd known about the affair before I ever brought it up, had her own file of proof, her own pile of shredded promises and receipts and late-night phone records. She just needed someone to confirm it wasn't all in her head. When she sent the photo of the divorce papers she served David, I didn't feel joy. I felt equilibrium. Like the universe had finally shifted its weight just a little back in my direction. 2 days later, David was out of a job. I didn't make any calls, didn't send an email, didn't whisper a single word to anyone directly. I didn't need to. People like David climb ladders by stepping on people's backs, and eventually someone always notices the bruises. All I did was remind a mutual contact about an ethics complaint he'd swept under the rug for a friend. One email, one nudge, and David was done. Terminated. Conduct unbecoming, the memo said. Could have meant anything. Didn't need to mean more. Word travels fast in circles like ours, country club friends, old colleagues, the once-a-month wine group that was more gossip than grapes. And when the story started spreading, Linda's circle began to shrink like cold leather. She tried to get ahead of it, posted photos of herself smiling at a brunch that didn't happen, used hashtags like healing and growth under pictures of empty wine glasses and curated sadness. But no one believed her. People don't like when the villain wears pearls and plays the victim. Our son, Tyler, called me that Sunday. I hadn't told him anything at first. I wanted to keep him out of it. He'd just landed his first job out of college and was finally building his own life, one not shaped by my decisions or her manipulations. But the story was leaking faster than I could contain it, and I figured it was better coming from me than the internet. He came over that night, brought takeout, and sat on the porch with me in silence for 20 minutes before he finally asked, "So it's true?" I nodded. He didn't cry, didn't even look surprised. Just shook his head slowly and said, "You always gave her more than she gave back." I didn't know what to say. What can a man say when his son sees through the illusion you tried to keep intact for his sake? Later, I found out he confronted her. Said the one thing that cut deeper than anything I ever could have said. "You used Dad. You made him small." She called me 2 days after that. I let it ring twice before picking up, mostly because I wanted to hear how she would start. She didn't waste time. "You still love me, don't you?" It wasn't a question so much as a last hope tossed into a fire, watching to see if it burns or bounces back. I paused, then answered with the only truth I had left. "I loved who I thought you were." There was silence on the other end, and I could almost hear her thinking, scrambling to make sense of a version of me that no longer fit into her world. She waited a beat longer, then her voice dropped low, calm, eerie, familiar in a way that brought goosebumps to the back of my neck. "If you don't talk to me, I'll make you." The line went dead. I sat there staring at the screen, the silence stretching out again, only now it wasn't peaceful, it was a fuse. And I had no idea how long it was. The voicemail came just before midnight, and for a moment I considered letting it sit there unheard, just one more digital cry in a long string of increasingly desperate attempts to claw her way back into a space that was no longer hers. But something about the silence afterward, the kind of quiet that makes you sit up straighter without knowing why, pulled my thumb toward the screen. The second the message began, I heard her voice, raw and slurred with something between tears and exhaustion, a sound I hadn't heard in years, not since the night my father died, and she held onto me like she was afraid I'd break apart. "Mark, I'm at the house," she said, pausing to breathe like the words themselves were hard to carry. I didn't know where else to go. I needed to remember something good, something real. "I'm sorry. I really, really messed everything up. I know that. But not everything was a lie. You don't have to believe me, but I didn't fake it all." She sniffled, then sighed. The message ended without a goodbye. Just a long, crackling silence, as if she'd forgotten to hang up or hoped I would say something back to a recording. I stared at the screen for another minute, listening to the echo of her breath like it might tell me something the words didn't. I didn't rush. I got up, brushed my teeth, changed shirts, and grabbed my keys like I was heading out for groceries, not walking back into a life I thought I'd finally closed the door on. The drive took less than 10 minutes, though it felt longer than the road could possibly stretch. My hands didn't shake, but something in my chest did, some old part of me that still knew every creak in the hallway and every knot in the wooden floorboards. The house was dark when I pulled up. No porch light, no glow in the windows, nothing to suggest someone was inside. I didn't pull into the garage. I stopped at the edge of the driveway, just behind the same spot where she used to stand on Sunday mornings watering those damn hydrangeas that never bloomed the way she wanted. I killed the engine but didn't move. Just sat there with the keys in my hand, listening to the click of the cooling engine and the low hum of streetlights humming like they were tired too. A neighbor walked by, the one with the loud dog and the always too short jogging shorts. He gave me a half nod, slowing just enough to look curious, but not enough to get involved. "Didn't think you'd be back here," he muttered. I nodded, didn't answer. He didn't press. I got out and walked up to the front door, which was unlocked, of course it was. Linda had always been careless with locks, convinced no one ever came after what was already broken. The inside of the house was colder than I remembered, though the heat was on. Something about the absence of life makes even warm air feel hollow. Every room was untouched. No suitcases by the door. No drawers open. No shoes kicked off near the rug like she used to do when she got home in a hurry. In the kitchen, there was a single note on the counter, folded once, written in her handwriting that somehow looked shakier than usual. "You win." That was it. 2 words. No apology. No explanation. Just a simple concession scrawled on a piece of notepad paper that still had a grocery list on the back. I stood there staring at it like it might morph into something deeper, something that would finally tell me why. But just below, barely visible beneath the fold, was a second line. It was written lighter, like she wasn't sure she wanted it to be read. I wasn't lying about everything. I sat down in the kitchen chair, the same one I'd eaten dinner in for 25 years, and let the words settle over me like dust. That sentence, it was a thread. And if I pulled it, I didn't know if I'd unravel what was left or tighten the knot around my own chest. Memories came back uninvited, images I'd pushed so far down I thought they were dead. Her holding my hand at my father's funeral, the way she didn't say a word but wouldn't let go for hours. The night we danced barefoot in the kitchen while the lasagna burned in the oven, some song from the 70s playing too low to hear the words, but loud enough to move to the rhythm. Her laugh when I dropped the wine bottle on the floor and blamed the ghost of her mother. Were those things fake too? Or were those the pieces she meant when she said not everything was a lie? Was it possible she really did love me once, in her own twisted way, before the resentment took root and the walls went up? She hadn't taken a single thing. Not her clothes. Not her shoes. Not the jewelry she swore she'd never part with. The closet was untouched, the bathroom drawers still full of the same expensive skincare bottles she never let me use. It was like she'd left herself behind, like she expected to come back. Or maybe she wanted me to wonder if she would. I stood in the middle of the empty living room, breathing in the familiar scent of wood polish and lavender, and I realized something that settled in my bones like a slow, creeping frost. She didn't stay for the house. She stayed because she never thought I'd leave. And when I finally did, when I showed her the exit and closed the door behind her, she realized she didn't know how to exist without the story she'd written about herself. Funny how people show their truth at the very end. Maybe she stayed for the house. Maybe she stayed because she didn't think I'd leave her. Or maybe, just maybe, she thought I never would.